Welcome to Swiss Holistic Institute, inviting you to this video podcast series on spiritual elderhood with Bob Weathers and Thomas Rüedi. Today's issue is anger.
Greetings to everyone. Dr. Thomas Rüedi and myself, Bob Weathers, are very honored to have you join us today. It's a time of celebration. Thomas and I have just been celebrating the publication of his brand new book. You want to hold it up, Thomas? Two of them. Yeah, there it is. That's the hardback, 3 Steps into Oneness. This is an incredible book, and Thomas might want to say more about it, but I got a chance to read it in manuscript form and was riveted every page. And as Thomas and I were just speaking, this is truly not only his magnum opus, but it's a magnum opus for this time. And it couldn't be better timed, the publication of. So congratulations, Thomas. Really celebrate with you. One of the things that Thomas talks about in the book, in reference to especially Robert Augustus Masters, his work on anger and masculinity, is Thomas addresses so many rich themes in this book. One of them is, how do we manage anger without becoming aggressive or violent, and yet see the value, the beauty, the power, the necessity of anger. Thomas and I were just talking about the climate summit that's going on just right now as we record this, and that some of the ironies built into this. I won't go into the specifics right now, but that he and I laughed. We could just as easily have cried, and we could just as easily gone into expressing anger. And it's a time where rightful anger really makes a lot of sense with a lot of issues, not the least of which is our climate situation. So I'd like to introduce our dialogue today. It's going to be a free-flowing conversation between two dear friends about a topic that we both care a lot about. And so welcome to everybody. I'd like to hand the mic, so to speak, to Thomas, and we'll take it from there. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's such a pleasure to see you again and to talk to you again, as we did for many times already. And it's another moment to enjoy. And yes, I think reflecting on some really important issues on my book is, I would say, to write a book from the beginning to the end, and to bring it into the world, to publish it, to do everything. In my opinion, you need a portion of anger. That means not getting angry or aggressive to people, but you have to stick with it. You have to sometimes a little bit bite on wood or something, you think, oh, this is there is some hindrances to overcome, and you have no clue how to do, or and of course I had a lot to learn how, I was working with an American book coach, and I was having lots of lessons to learn how business is in United States, because it has some significant differences between here, Switzerland or Europe, or to United States. And so I think that's maybe a beginning part of view, to say, if we want to really fulfill something, or to get something in deep and depth, or to not to stop when it hurts, you have to have this kind of life force. I call it a life force, anger as a life force, as a pure life force. And it's completely something different than when people get aggressive or violent, as we can see it in all these war zones all over the world. It's not. I think in the end, it's a lot of misunderstanding about anger, in this world. So I think it's good to talk about.
Yeah, I really appreciate the direction that you've already offered for us, Tomas. Looking at anger is very much related to our ambition and to our reaching our goals, and it makes me think of anger as just as you said, as a life force that is necessary. I'll tell you a quick story, Tomas.
Yeah, please.
35, 40 years ago, you and I have spoken of this. We both value Buddhist meditation. I began meditating in the summer of 1980. I didn't know a soul that had ever done this. I was going to a Christian seminary at the time, but I began to read and study and practice Buddhist meditation. A few years into my Buddhist meditation, what I was aware of is that I was in a relationship, in a long-term marriage, that I needed to leave. I needed to leave that for the sake of what was required of me in my lifetime, is what it felt like. And it was painful to me because it wasn't out of hatred. It was out of a sense of just limitation. So there was grief involved. I'm quite sure that I was probably using meditation wrongly. So I in no way want to blame mindfulness practice on this. But I realized at some point that I needed to stop meditating for a period of time to work up enough anger to motivate me to do what was going to be so difficult, namely to leave the marriage. And I did do that. I stopped meditating for the better part of a year, began to feel my anger. Unfortunately for me, I think my meditation had squelched my anger. And I don't think that that's the fault of meditation. I was young in meditation, and that's what happened. But my intuition was I needed to feel the anger, and I needed to stop doing anything that got in the way of that. So I stopped for a period of time, got angry, did end my marriage, and then resumed meditation again, having learned a lesson, which is, let me never use meditation as an anesthetic to anger, because anger is related to my motivation, my incentive, my strength, my ambition. And ever since then, I've been very careful to include anger as part of my meditation. It isn't like anger gets rid of meditation. It actually helps me to be present with anger. That meditation doesn't get rid of anger. It helps me be with it. So I hope that comes through. I don't think I've ever confessed that publicly before, but it's the absolute truth. I realized that in order to accomplish something, I needed to get rid of the barriers. And for me, it was anything that got in the way of that. And ironically, for that period of time, it was my version of Buddhist meditation. I've continued to practice for the last 30, 35 years, and I can still get pissed off. I can still be angry. and it's as a good Buddhist meditator.
I think it came to my mind that we could say, because one of our great issues within this cycle we are talking now to one another is elderhood now. So it's like spiritual elderhood means anger is part of a ripe elderhood, of a knowing, wise elderhood. So of course, most of us have a cultural picture about, wisdom is something, very calm, very friendly, and very, how you say, embracing. And of course, this is a very, very powerful life force too. I mean, to care for somebody, or or to have affection. And on the other hand, that was something I was trying to point out a little bit in my book. Is I'm saying anger could be a special form of, in Buddhist context, we would say paramita. Paramita is that there are really some very basic, very deep rules about how to deal like discipline, like, you know, like generosity and everything. So, so what I brought up in my book is the question if we could bring up anger as something pure, you know, as something that could destroy all structures, destroy silly structures, silly stuff going on the world, or silly stuff going on in our relationships, or silly stuff going on with ourselves, you know, dealing with ourselves and our body houses, you know. So I'm convinced that, of course, you know, anger was a very important power in my life from the beginning, but for lots of reasons. But I have learned to somehow to channel, to cultivate that power to something quite sharp, quite strong, but hopefully not, you know, hurting people, or deliberately hurting, or diminishing somebody, you know, in any sense. So yeah, I think that this is something I'm really, I was lots of, you know, thinking over and trying to introduce into my my life, and especially I think I would love to express this in my part of my life as getting an elder, and expressing elderhood as something very powerful, not something weak, you know.
I had a memory that came up just now as I was listening to you, Tomas. It's an insight that came really out of listening to what you were saying. When I was young, you know a bit about my story. When I was young, I grew up in a very troubled household, very, very difficult household, emotionally and physically, just very difficult for me. And so my first 3 years in school, this part I don't think we've ever talked about, Tomas. My first 3 years in school, I was always in fights. I was always being violent, to be honest with you. It's like I was being at school what I was experiencing at home. It's a very violent household. And starting around age 8 or 9, I can remember it very clearly, there was some dawning awareness that I must not continue this. I saw it with my 2 older brothers and my younger sister. And I thought, I must not continue this because it's going to end up not going well for me. And so this is the insight that just came to me listening to you. This is the insight that comes with elderhood, is that there was incredible grace for me. So what I did is I began channeling my energy into a couple of different routes. One was into drumming. As you know, I started drumming at that age. And so it gave me a physical expression for creativity that was not going to hurt anybody. Yeah. And the other I started getting involved in sports and athletics. And so for me, every sport I played, I was able to channel that energy. A big outlet for me for decades was tennis. I was a tournament tennis player, and just the ability to hit a ball and compete, all of that was a way for me to express anger. And I can remember then through the rest of grade school, into junior high school, into high school, and into college, that drumming, I used to tell people that if it wasn't for drumming and tennis, I probably would have killed somebody. And there's a way that may be dramatic, but there's a way that may be true, because it gave me anger, and it was able to simmer down so that I was able to be angry in a more contained way, so that I didn't violate people. A couple of other things come to mind, and then I'll hand it back to you. Yeah. Another area, at that same age, I began to be very competitive academically. Up to that point, I was always in trouble in class. They wouldn't let me go out on the playground at recess because I was always in fights. So I had to go sit in the principal's office. They wouldn't. It was bad. It was bad. And so I began to compete in school, and my attention began to focus, and I began to rise up in my class in terms of excelling. And so I think even that was born out of anger. I was competitive. Like, I wanted to learn as much as I could, and if it helped me to be the top, that would be great. What I'm aware of is that in my family, there was very little value for the body. And so for me, drumming and tennis and sports, that was a way of being embodied with my anger. It was not in a very embodied family. The other thing that comes to me is I was in a family that didn't value the right brain or creativity. And so music became a massive expression for me. It still is, as you know, for both of us it is. And so I'm really grateful that whatever that anger was, transformed almost alchemically into creativity, into embodiment, and even into using my mind in the way that has continued across my entire adulthood. So I'm really grateful. Anger is the seed for that, but it needed to be transformed, or else I could have ended up killing somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you look out into the world, what we can see now, and with all these wars going on, and all these you know, this sort of kind of leaders there are with all that that crooked messages they stand for, you know. I think we can experience a lot of anger going astray, you know, going into any kind of misuse, any kind of aggression, any kind of manipulating people, any kind of, you know, doing violence to I mean, doing violence in the end to themselves, to ourselves, you know, but doing violence to our next and to the world or to the nature. I mean, what we can see, what we can do, what we can see within our relationship as human beings to nature. This is another quite a strong point in my book too. We have somehow forgotten how would be coexistence within this planet Earth as a human being with all its potential, but for the planet, not against the planet, or just, you know, doing any kind of destroying stuff, or you know, that's something I really feel in my life. I'm this is of course in my book too, this saying, we need some wisdom back. We need some, you know, wisdom in our lives, not in the church, or in you know, in a religious context, of course too, but what we need is to have this kind of wisdom combined sometimes with anger, you know. So that's what I call in my book wrathful compassion, you know. I have been finding this combination also in Buddhist, where there are these wrathful deities, and wrathful deities usually just destroy things that are not healthy. They are you know, maybe, you know, structures that help certain people, and most people suffer, you know. So this is so I learned there is even like a holy anger, you know, around, and that's something I'm really fascinating about bringing spiritual work within, you know, in touch with anger, you know, saying how do we express spiritual anger to bring things forward that people get healthy themselves, but their relationships, but to nature and the world too. So this is another aspect.
I know we've spoken of this before, but what comes up for me right now is an experience that I shared with you before. Just this past summer, I had a very powerful collision with my wife. She and I have talked about it since then as a supernova. It was an explosion, and it was born out of anger. It was born out of rageful anger. It was very powerful anger, and I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say it was aggressive. It might not have been violent, but it was aggressive in terms of my tone and so on. And that particular night, I went to bed. I was very troubled by this emotional collision between us. That night, I got up at midnight and I wrote for about 3 hours after that. What was that about? And what came in those 3 hours was so incredibly important in my life and in my relationship to Colleen. It's really been an axis, a pivot point in our relationship. We've been together for almost 15 years, and it was that anger that opened up things for me to see that I needed to bring more of myself to the relationship, be more honest with myself and be more honest with her. And it was the anger that was my friend. I've really begun to realize that anger can be a guide or a friend if we have ears to hear it. And it wasn't pleasant. There was nothing about it that was pretty, but I don't think that if there hadn't been the explosion, there wouldn't have been the chance for renovation that has continued. So that was back in July. It was July 6th. It's unforgettable, the date. And so here we are 8 months later, and it's not gone back to the way it was before. It completely changed things. It's almost like what they call it, the continental drift, when the continents separated. It's like something opened up or parted there. And I'm very grateful to it. And it's really given me a new respect and appreciation at a very deep spiritual level of anger, because it was anger that was really my deepest, dearest friend and guide through a very difficult time.
Wow, thank you for sharing this, Bob. Yes, at the moment I experience some quite difficult times within my family too, yes, I feel this is similar to what you're talking is it can be really powerful and very useful to bring forward our relationships to in this context to within the families, within my two brothers and my father. My father is now like 92 years old, so it's quite difficult to communicate, but it's still there. And I was talking to him on Saturday about some of these issues, and I was really amazed how present he was and how he completely got the point. Even though when some hours before, if you talk to him about a date, he wouldn't know it 1 hour later. So it's still it is this kind of presence, and I feel that most of us are really horrified or have a lot of anger about expressing pure anger, because we don't know what it is really and why and what are the very important differences to aggression and violence. And I think the basic of this view, I think that's what you introduced this issue to, is I think the very important work of Robert Augustus Masters on his book about anger and so there is this differentiation, that we can see. Anger is, I can what I remember him writing in his book, he's saying, in the pure aspect of anger, we need a lot of more anger, not less. You know, especially with men using anger as a power to come over, you know, really old stuff or you know, silly stuff, you know. And that's something I really I'm really impressed about this view, you know.
You used the term earlier, wrathful compassion. I learned that from you, Tomas, from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And, you know, in the West, many of us haven't been exposed to this concept in the Tibetan form, but we've been exposed to it within the Jewish and Christian form. That the kind of the archetypal example that comes to my mind is from the Christian tradition, where Jesus walks into the temple where they have introduced, they're selling, they've turned it into a marketplace, and he completely loses it. And as the Bible recounts, he just turns over tables and he's yelling, and he says, "You cannot do this in my Father's house," which is to say, you cannot profane that which is holy and sacred and good. And I think it's a wonderful example in the Western tradition of wrathful compassion. The sense that it's the one example in the New Testament where Jesus is shown to be completely angry. I don't know that he was violent towards anybody. He was violent towards the tables with all the money on them. But I think there's an example there. And that image, because it's such a common image, it's almost a cultural image in the West for sure. It comes up not infrequently in the counseling that I do, where people will talk about needing to take a stand on something, and we'll talk about Jesus as one avatar, one archetypal image of how one can be with one's anger, and how it's necessary. It's necessary to be with one's anger when somebody is violating your father's house, your mother's house, that which is the holy of holies. And I really appreciate learning that from you. My own therapist over the years used a slightly different term from another book that's based in Tibetan Buddhism, and the title is Ruthless Compassion. The idea that compassion could be ruthless. That's an interesting juxtaposition of two terms: ruthlessness and compassion, wrath and compassion. And that's really what we're talking about. It's compassion that is able to access anger when necessary, fully. You know?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting issue, and I'm sure all over the world. I think what I was thinking about writing my latest book is how to elaborate wisdom traditions and to the modern times, you know. And I think modern times with psychotherapy, trauma therapy, and neurosciences and stuff like this, they brought up also this issue, you know, how these life forces can be used to, and how it is important to for traumatized people to get back into you know, when they get back into these victimized you know, moments, to get into the anger, to stand up and or to and if it is only like some kind of picture, in a picture to work with. And that's why I believe that anger can be part of a holistic view in spiritual, also within a holistic worldview, you know, completely on the opposite side to all that war stuff going on. That is far, you know, far as the way you can ever be from wisdom, you know. And so yeah, it's a really interesting issue, because it seems to be in spiritual I have been, both of us have been really deep into spiritual in different traditions, but it seems to be something you don't talk about. That is completely not spiritual, and I'm sure it's not true. It's something. If you can understand it in a modern way as a life force, it can be an important part of our spiritual life too.
I learned so much around this integration that you're talking about from one of your fellow Swissmen, Dr. Carl Jung. I learned so much from his writings about this, and there's a way that this matches my experience. As a boy growing up, I had all of this anger. I shared that with you earlier, and it was with me through my early years in school. And then what I did is I cut it off. I cut it off way too much. And I mentioned drumming and sports, and I'm grateful for them. But in many other ways, I cut it off. And what Carl Jung would say, he refers to the ancient traditions of alchemy, is that what happens is that one can move from the color black, which is negredo in Latin, to the color white, which is albedo. And then many people, and I'll say this for in terms of the U.S. around U.S. Versions of Christian religion, particularly dominated by evangelical Christianity, which I was a part of for earlier in my life, is that there's a way that certain forms of religion will split off the black and just emphasize becoming albedo or white. But Carl Jung says that's only halfway to where you're meant to be. He says the goal is to integrate black and white, and the integration of black and white is not gray like it would be in the color spectrum. It's actually rubedo, which is the red. And when I read about rubedo, I think about anger. Anger to me has a red quality, and ideally it's a ruby red. It's rubedo, and the goal is not to cut off the black. It's actually to integrate the black. I was just reading Lao Tzu this morning in the Tao Te Ching. It was a translation done that the term was, gravity is the root of grace. Gravity is the root of grace. And if we think of grace as being love and light and all of that, gravity is that which pulls us down to the earth. And the goal is to bring gravity and grace together. And I think that's what Jung meant by rubedo. And so I want any experience I have with spirituality to be red. I'm not interested in white spirituality, albedo, because it cuts off the black. It judges the black. It attacks the black. The goal would be to integrate the black. And then what you end up with is a full-bodied elderhood, like ours.
Yeah, great. So, you might remember reading my book and saying, at the first step, it's about bringing together polarity, like I say, the minor polarities. These are, we could say it's bliss and anger. It's
beautiful.
What happens. This is what I bring up in my book, saying if we can work out bliss and pain or anger coming together, touching each other, then what I believe is then what I call relative wisdom. Wisdom is there, the lived wisdom or expressed living wisdom happens, and that's what I really miss on this earth. That we seem to have forgotten how to bring up, these kind of relative wisdom. And I think that's why I brought this up in my book, this kind of polarity that needs to be at the first step, at the basic step. You have to bring together to be able to have access to both, ideally to the same time, And then what I believe, there's something different happening. There is something new. There is what I call, there is the wisdom is coming.
Beautiful. Yeah, when I listen to you right now about polarities, and by the way, I want to recommend to anybody that's watching this conversation between Tomas and me to please get his book and read his wonderful explication of polarities and working with polarities and drawing them together at the relative dimension as well as opening into the absolute. It's just brilliant. The writing is brilliant. What comes to my mind, Tomas, is that you know that I've done so much work in the last 10 years on this topic of forgiveness.
Oh, yeah.
One of the mistakes that's made oftentimes in the forgiveness practice, as well as in the literature within psychology of forgiveness, is the idea is that if I forgive somebody, in fact, I've had clients say this to me from the very beginning, if I forgive somebody, does that mean that I have to let go of my anger? And my thought about that would be to follow the Jungian analyst James Hillman. He says, to forgive somebody, you need to remember the anger, not let go of it, but to remember it. And to forgive is not the same as pretending like things are fine. There's a way that I may want to let go of the burden of resenting somebody or wishing them harm. That would be a benefit to me to let go of that burden. That's not the same as somehow forgetting. In fact, Hillman said, forgiveness is not forgetting. We have this saying in English, forgive and forget. He just goes crazy with that. No, you forgive and remember. And that's about hanging on to the red hot anger as necessary, not to wish the other person harm, but and not to hold a grudge or relinquish, or to hang on to resentment. But in order to relinquish that, the only way I can do that is remember what happened. There's another distinction in the forgiveness literature between forgiving somebody and reconciling with them. This also is very helpful to know. I can forgive somebody. For example, I've forgiven both my parents who have both passed for the various things that I implied earlier that were very difficult for me. But in terms of reconciling with them, if they were still alive, I don't know that we would reconcile. Our relationship would be very limited because there's no way that you can reconcile if there's not a dialogue, if there's not a genuine connection. And I didn't have that with either one of them. It makes me sad to say that. My responsibility to forgive them is an inner process, but in terms of reconciling, I'd have to ignore the fact that they were limited right up to the end to when they died. It would have been unwise to engage in. And many of you can think of people that have hurt you, that to engage with them would be the height of naivete. You can still forgive them, but that's not about letting go of anger. That's about remembering. How did Voltaire say it in the French Revolution? Remember the cruelties. He wanted the French people to remember the cruelties because he was worried that the peasants wouldn't rise up against the aristocracy if they forgot the cruelties. And so he said, remember that. Well, that's really what we're talking about. It's about integrating and remembering the anger, the hurt, whatever it is that precedes our anger.
I mean, what comes up is especially in this context, we should really remember the difference between anger and violence and aggression within this context, because I mean, this is an incredible point of view to have this discrimination, what is what. So it's I think that's what I feel when I get angry or even aggressive. I always if something happens, I always reflect and try to find out if there has been any aggression. So I confess and I ask for forgiveness. But if there is something really powerful, angry, wanting to change things, I stick with this. So I won't step back. Yeah. So Bob, it's as far as I can see, it's time to to have to end this session of today. I mean, of course, we will continue because it's such a joy and it's such an interesting conversation. We have no clue what we are going to talk about. It's a little bit like when I can do music with my brothers. We just walk in the church and then we do music. We have no clue what's going on. So it's a joy, and I'm really grateful for this, and thank you for sharing everything.
Tomas, me too. I was thinking of you, Tomas, and your brothers this week. I was on my mind the most recent recording that you shared with me. For those that don't know this, Tomas is multi-talented, and one of his talents is as a musician, as are his brothers, and they have out multiple recordings. And the latest one that you sent me a couple of years ago is some of my favorite improvised music. And it's you guys walking, like you say, into an environment. It sounds like it was a church and communicating with each other. It's incredibly powerful to me. It's really one of my favorite recordings. And it's this man not only writes, but he plays music beautifully and a lot of other things too. So it's a joy to be with you and to improvise with you, dear friend. I think that our conversations are musical to me. I love where we go. And you're absolutely right. It was first thought, best thought today. There's none of this that was planned. We just arrived together and we've done this for years now. I'm very, very grateful to know you, Tomas Rüedi.
Oh, thanks a lot, and see you soon, and talk to you soon again. Huh?
If I don't see you, I wish you a very Merry Christmas. I really do, with your family. I know there's some challenging times right now, but I wish you happy holidays, including New Year's Day. And I look forward to seeing you. Maybe it'll be in 2024. Okay.
Yes, I will do my best as a pagan, to enjoy Christmas, so.